I would say I moved from one end of the leash to the other, being a veterinarian and seeing how important pets are in their lives. And really, that it turns out that's been the highlight of my veterinary career looking back.
This man walked from San Diego to Colorado with a donkey in his early 20s and became a veterinarian at age 44. And he's never stopped moving. Dr. Jon Geller didn't find veterinary medicine early, but he's not let that stop him from making an amazing impact on the profession and the world at large. A former building contractor who graduated from Colorado State's College of Veterinary Medicine at age 44, Jon went on to build 4 emergency hospitals in Colorado before a chance encounter with a homeless man and his pit bull on a bridge in Nashville changed everything. That moment led him to found the Street Dog Coalition, a nonprofit now operating in over 50 cities, providing free veterinary care to pets of people experiencing homelessness. It led him to earn his Master's of Public Health from the University of Minnesota. It took him to the Ukraine border 2 weeks after the war broke out, where he set up a veterinary tent for refugees crossing with their pets. And it has turned him into one of the most compelling advocates for access to care and the human-animal bond in our profession today. This is the perfect episode after last week with Dr. Rustin Moore around the human-animal bond. Jon describes his career as moving from one end of the leash to the other, from treating animals to understanding the humans on the other side of that bond, and what it means when the bond is all someone has left. In this conversation, we talk about his unlikely path, the Street Dog Coalition, what he's learned doing street medicine in underserved communities, bold ideas for systemic change, and why it is never, ever too late to start something that matters. Let's get to the conversation with Dr. Jon Geller. I'm waiting for the day that they make your life into a movie because your story is amazing. You've done a lot, very impressive, and excited to get to chat with you about it today. Now, you are more of a second career veterinarian, like I like to say. So you had a lot before you actually even got to vet school. And a lot of times when I've heard you start your story, you actually go back to around 18 years old when you didn't really know what you wanted to do, but you also were one of the ones who were not drafted for military service. So that probably was a lot of emotions at the same time because you probably knew a lot of people who were going into military service. So do you mind starting way back then and kind of sharing your journey up until you realized that maybe veterinary medicine was a route for you?
Oh, thanks, Megan. It's great to be with you. And I'm a huge fan of your podcast. And so thanks for your kind words also. So everything kind of started when I was actually in my young 20s. I did avoid the draft just through a draft lottery. And I definitely had friends and people I knew that went to Vietnam. And I'm still a big supporter of veterans because I know trauma that they went through. And, on a side note, I know how much that pets can sometimes provide lots of solace to them. So that's one thing. But when I was about 23, I just was kind of a lost soul. My girlfriend had broken up with me. She found another guy, was traumatized. And I decided to go on a journey of self-discovery. I didn't know it at the time, but I was in San Diego where my family was, and I purchased a burro, I think for $50, and got some panniers, and I had a German Shepherd dog, and we decided we would walk to Colorado. It'd take about half a year
Wow.
to do that journey. And in doing so, I had no clue about being a veterinarian. I didn't really know that much about animals, but I did learn through that journey that patience is a virtue because burros and donkeys can be very, very stubborn. I remember him lying down. We were in the Bill Williams River in Arizona. He had all of my stuff on his back, and he decided to take a little bath, and he laid down in the river. It was only about 3 feet deep, 3 or 4 feet deep. He laid down. All my stuff was getting wet. I grabbed my camping shovel, finally hit him on the butt, his bony butt. The shovel broke, so now I have no camping shovel. Well, eventually my stuff dried out, but lots of things like that happened. So I did learn patience and persistence because we got lost and all that. But I never actually got an undergraduate degree, but I ended up going into carpentry and building and started remodeling, and then I moved into kind of custom home building and design and contracting. So I was a building contractor until actually went into vet school.
Yeah. So this long journey that you were on, you said half a year. That's a long time to be alone with a dog and a really frustrating donkey. So what was kind of like, I'm sure you were thinking a lot about life. And so what was like your thought process all through that to actually get to going into carpentry? I feel like we're missing a lot.
Yeah, there's really no good explanation for what happened, because when you're doing something like that and it got me living pretty much day to day, in the moment, because I didn't really have anything else going on. So it was like, where's our next meal? Where's the next water? Where are we going to camp? And where's that trail that I can't find right now? And so you could say I was kind of a drifter then. And the carpentry was for me just a job. Somebody said, hey, at that time, I remember making $2 an hour framing homes. But I did have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit. And so I went from, being just a framing carpenter to a building contractor. And, the timeline is 1988. I was 38 years old. And yeah, I sat down with my wife and said, I'm ready to do something else. I want to do this for the rest of my life. So it was kind of a conscious decision. At that point, I realized veterinary medicine sounded like a great job. It wasn't something that was my dream from being a kid. I was pretty objective about it and decided that's what I wanted to do. So I went back to school and got all the prereqs done. So there isn't any explanation or connection between what I've done. I do usually tell my friends, and colleagues, I'm just late to the party. Yeah, I'm late to the party. And so I got out of vet school. I was 44.
It's never too late to jump in.
That's right. That's part of the message for today.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad you did. And it's a big decision too, because you had to do the prereqs, like you said, and then get into vet school. And I listened to a great podcast that you were on, and you were kind of sharing this, like on top of going through vet school, which that's all I did. And that was a lot. You still did your contracting business. You had 2 children, I believe, around toddler age. And you also really tried to get real life experience in veterinary clinics. So you're probably trying to get a lot of experience as well. So that's a lot. That's a lot going on. What was going through your mind during that time?
Actually having young kids, well, first of all, veterinary medicine is a great second career because I now had some financial base. So I wasn't too freaking out about student loans. And actually, we bought a really nice little house in Fort Collins. I moved my family here from Southern Colorado. I had a couple of young kids. My wife's a teacher. And our house has been going up in value like crazy. So I was able to use some home equity to do student loans. So that really helped. And I'm guilty of being very scattered, and you could even say shallow, in the sense that I'm doing way too many things at once, and I don't really get to kind of master any of them. That's just how it's been with me with vet medicine. That's why emergency work was good for me, because there's a lot of things going on at once, and I kind of like that.
You just have to find what works for you, right? So it's not necessarily bad or good. It's just what works. And it does make sense kind of knowing a little bit about your journey. And you're very quick to action. And I really admire that, because one, I'm not always good at that. And I think a lot of people in vet school, because the people that have known they wanted to go into veterinary medicine for a long time, we've had this long path. We knew all the things that it was going to take. And so we're just focused on that. And then when we get to the end of vet school, and we're like, now what? And you were like, oh, no, we're jumping in. Like, I have life experience. I know how to run a business. And so right out of vet school, you started like a mobile practice doing like all animals, and then found ER medicine, and that kind of fit too, kind of the way you like to work and everything. So how did you find that kind of fit what you loved and kind of filling your cup?
Yeah. Thanks for your comments, Jermaine. Actually, just like a lot of other things, emergency medicine was somewhat of an accident for me. I was struggling. I decided I was going to be my own boss right out of vet school, which is probably a mistake. I've never really had the kind of mentorship I wish I'd had. So I just worked my way through it, and I made some mistakes, many mistakes, and hopefully, none of them been too bad. But I know I've definitely done some harm along the way. But I just couldn't make ends meet with mobile practice, driving around to different farms and doing mixed animal. It's fun, but you can never get compensated for that driving time, even if you try to charge for it. So I did some emergency relief. And because I was large animal track at vet school, I didn't do that much. I maybe got a week of emergency, but I really did fall in love with emergency medicine right away. I liked kind of the spookiness of the graveyard shift, midnight hours. I actually like the chaos. It's like kind of bring it on. I'm fine with that. And it's kind of like being a construction superintendent where you have a lot of things going on and you have a team and you try to keep things under control as much as possible. So that's what I did. And I had hung around at a lot of vet clinics during vet school and made some friends, and now they were colleagues. And we partnered up and we ended up starting 4 emergency hospitals in Colorado, but I also worked there and hospital director too. So I kind of loved almost every minute of it, although at times it was definitely exhausting. And of course, when we got into too much death and euthanasia, that was really draining too.
Yeah. And that can be common on an emergency type of shift. It is, something comes in and all of a sudden it's now they need to decide, or something's unexpected. And there's lots of reasons why that might be presented as an option. So yeah, I can definitely see how that would be difficult.
Yep, that euthanasia process, which happens really mostly to emergency vets. I mean, we just do it a lot, and we're doing it with people we probably met for the first time. So these aren't like dogs that we've taken care of since they're puppies or cats. So there's a lot of stress around it and a lot of anxiety and human emotion, and it's had its toll on veterinarians. I think it's taken more of a toll. It's hard to objectify the toll in doing euthanasia has on veterinarians, but there's no other occupation or profession in the world that includes it. Watching the life go out of the eyes of a pet. So I've been studying. About 10 years ago, I started writing about drug abuse and suicide a little bit in the veterinary profession because we had 2 of our technicians that took their own lives, a couple of our hospitals, and it kind of got me interested. And without going into too much detail, I had some kind of accidental connections with a CDC doctor who wrote the first reports about it. But jumping to the present, I'm currently going through something called QPR training. I'm not sure if you know about it. It's a suicide detection and prevention program analogous to CPR. And I'm hoping to go to veterinary clinics and talk about suicide in a very direct way and how to early detection strategies and intervention strategies. Not trying to be a social worker, counselor, psychiatrist, just trying to be a person who can tell when someone's in trouble. So that's kind of my next. I kind of jumped forward all the way to today, and that's what I'm working on. But that goes all the way back to seeing the effects of euthanasia and other stress factors on emergency vets, especially. But I know that many veterinarians are subject to these pressures and risk factors.
Yeah, yeah. And even though today I'm a nutritionist, I spent a year doing pretty much emergency medicine as an intern, and I still remember. Sadly, the cases I remember are the ones that are more of the euthanasia cases, and they stick with you. And I just wrote an article about that. We tend to remember the bad things, the negative, or the things that didn't go the way we would have liked. And so that's also something to acknowledge. And I see you care about people, and so having people in your sphere that you lost, I can see that would create a movement in you. And again, you're a person of action.
And that's kind of summarize. I mean, I know we have some gaps we might want to cover, but I would say I moved from one end of the leash to the other as being a veterinarian and seeing its impact, mostly positive, on people and how important pets are in their lives. So I got my MPH just a little over a year ago from Minnesota, and I kind of call myself now a public health veterinarian. and talk about community health, because I think the term One Health is a little bit too vague, I think, to be useful. Most people with pets really have no idea what it means. So I try to avoid that terminology, but that's kind of, where my work is kind of centered right now. I'm probably leaning more toward the human side, which is why I'm getting ready to do the work I just told you about. So, veterinary medicine, if you're lucky enough to have the flexibility, it can be an amazing journey. I know a lot of your podcasts are about how there's so many ways to engage with veterinary medicine, to explore, and it never ends, so it's definitely not too late, but I'm exploring more on the people side of the leash.
Yes, I heard you say that you were so happy that you ended up choosing veterinary medicine because of the diversity of opportunities you can do, and it fit your personality, who likes to do so many different things, and you can in this profession, which is so exciting. So I think your career path is just a great example. And we can even go back, hopefully I have this date right, but around 2010, you become a certified veterinary journalist and you get your diplomat DABP.
Thank you, VP.
So you also love to learn, but like journalism and advancing your medical knowledge. I'll be honest, I'm super interested in the journalist part. Like, when did you get that urge? Because you've written a lot now, and I think that's actually a big part of what you do, because you have a lot of advocacy in what you do, and part of advocacy is being able to write and communicate to the people that can have impact and help move things along. So what intrigued you about journalism and starting to write?
Well, it turns out my undergrad struggles, I mentioned I never graduated, basically dropped out. A funny side note story is I went to University of Colorado, Boulder. I dropped out after year 3. Both of my daughters went there and they both dropped out. So it's kind of a family bond we have going. But one of the things I seemed to be effective at, I had to take a writing class, like everybody, English class. The instructor said, "You kind of got away with words and you should explore it more." So writing was something I ended up really liking to do, using words to try to convey the world the way I saw it. But my writing initially and for a long time was for the pet owning public. And it was pretty easy because now as a veterinarian, I wrote stories, everything from, 10 signs of cancer in your pet. And I wrote for magazines like Pets Today and Cat Journal, Mother Earth News. So it was kind of down-home advice for pet owners. It wasn't too technical. And then I started writing funny stories. There's no lack of that, right? Of little disasters, all the disasters along the way. Things are funny. And I did that. And then I started writing for veterinarians. I published some of those funny stories. That was good stuff. And then finally later on, I got into, more veterinary journalism and, did a couple of peer-reviewed articles along with. Those aren't really that much fun, right? They're hard work and reference to citations. So if I was going to write, it would more be offhand. But it's just something I enjoy, just like, I enjoy trying to write some music too. And I play guitar. But as I mentioned earlier, I'm not that very good at either one because I'm too scattered to spend the time. It's not like I'm going to ever do anything 10,000 times. But I kind of wish that I could. God, it's too late now.
I don't know. You're putting in a lot of reps. So you don't have to be the absolute number one writer to have fun with it, to have a lot of impact. But you're a Renaissance man, so you can do a little bit of everything. That's awesome. And then I guess within the next 5 years or so, you also started getting involved with the Humane Society. But it was also around that time that I think you were at a conference, a veterinary conference, and you see an individual and it kind of makes you rethink your future. Do you mind sharing that story?
Not at all. And at the time, I wasn't really aware of what was happening, the impact it would have on me. But it was 2014. I think it was in a hot conference. It was in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was thinking about, what could I do in the profession? But I mean, I didn't mind doing my year shifts because I still had another 6 years to go. But at this conference, I'll go back even one more step. They brought in a speaker named John Paul DeJorio, and he had a great story. He's not a veterinarian, but he's the one that started Paul Mitchell for hair care, etc., and told his story. His messaging was pretty simple, but it's kind of beautiful. He said, "Do everything with love." He even talks to the military. He's a military consultant. He talks to the guys about doing that. So it seems crazy, but it's a really nice message. But after hearing that and and meeting him and talking to him a little bit, I was a little bit inspired. I walked across this bridge in Nashville, and it's a short bridge. It's like a wooden bridge arched over a small stream. And there's a guy sitting on it with his pit bull. And, he has his backpack with him. He's clearly unhoused. And his pit bull looks at me, and I can tell pit bulls, you can tell from how they smile at you, what their temperament's likely like. But anyway, very nice dog, just kind of looking at me. He had a look of expectation, and the guy did too. They just kind of looked at me in a nice way, but it had a look of expectancy. The message I got without us ever saying a word was, "Can't you do something? Can't you do something?" And so I thought about it for a while. I realized, I'm going to do some investigation and see how many homeless people are there in the United States and how many of them have pets. And I already knew that none of them could pay for care because they have no money. I mean, they're at $0, $10 is sometimes a big deal. And I realized, this is a relatively small group. Figured out there's maybe 200,000 pets living on the streets with their owners. Most shelters don't allow people with pets. At least they didn't back then. And so I said, this could be something where we can have an impact on this. A small group and anything helps. And so then I decided to start a nonprofit whose mission was provide free veterinary care to pets of people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And so the Street Dog Coalition was launched, and that was in 2015.
Listening to your story a couple times, a different podcast, just preparing for this, I wonder, and maybe not at that particular moment of that individual in Nashville, but since then, like working with people on the streets, do you ever have flashbacks to your journey in Colorado with a German Shepherd and a donkey?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, putting everything in context, just the challenges that group face are unbelievable. Of course, they're looking for the next meal, the next place to sleep too. But when you think about it, living on the streets or even staying in shelters, which a lot of homeless folks don't even want to do because it's so miserable. So they're facing lots of hardships. But when you get a pet, now your hard life is even harder because that pet provides, it's a paradox. It provides so much support and purpose and companionship to your life and even more protection, especially for women. Now you've lost your access to a lot of places. Like you can't go into a shelter to sleep. You can't go into a grocery store to shop because these aren't service dogs. You can't go, into a doctor's office. Even going into a bathroom is problematic. 7-Eleven, you probably have to find someone to watch your dog. So they are suddenly committed to living on the street without any real hope of getting housed. The cost of going from living on the street to getting housing is, if you think about it, it's unbelievable. Having to come up with a deposit and first and last month's rent can be anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, depending where you live. And so that's out of reach. So it's just trying to make the best of it. And as veterinarians, we can help by providing the support to their pets and even some support to them as well. And of course, that's kind of what got me started on my journey from one end of the leash to the other.
And you've talked about there's almost like a pack of two mentality. So there is the feeling of you're not alone by having the pet, and they're probably even better to a lot of people than a human because they aren't judging. They just love and want to be with you. And you even talked about for women, it can be not only a sense of companionship, but also safety. Someone might be less likely to pick on you if you have a pit bull with you. That takes it to a whole nother level on the relationship between a human and their pet. Do you have a particular interaction that you just constantly still remember from meeting all these individuals?
Thanks, Ming. I actually have a lot,
I'm
and
sure.
they kind of meld together. But I think the ones that stand out is that we already talked about this, but we go to these veteran events called veteran stand-downs. And these are for veterans that are struggling with homelessness. They might be homeless. Veterans have, it's going all the way back to the Vietnam draft thing, because the veterans, a lot of them that I work with are my age and they're Vietnam vets. We go to these events where it's a multi-service event. So they might be getting from sleeping bags to dental care to job placement and haircuts, but we're providing veterinary care. And I've had so many of them share stories about how their animal kind of saved their life when they were so ready to give up. And veterans share with veterinarians a high suicide rate. They make up 7% of the US population, and 16% of the suicides are veterans. So it's fairly intense. But one man told me the story of how his son had committed suicide, and he had inherited his dog. He had a large tan German Shepherd looking dog. And his dog was his only memory of his son. And he was struggling himself to stay on his feet, battling things, I'm sure, probably some drug abuse issues and so forth. But it's all about gratitude, so much gratitude from folks when we just help them a little. I mean, giving a rabies shot, isn't that much, but it's actually a big deal for folks, because if their dog who lives outside 24/7 usually, let's say it happens to get loose and some kids are messing with it and bites a kid, now this is becoming a legal and financial nightmare where there's a very good chance they're going to end up in jail, because it's going to be reported. The wound will be reported, animal control. Then they're cited for, rabies tag, dog running around at large. They can't pay the fine. They get picked up and end up in jail. So then they have to eventually pay it. So a little bit goes a long way. And I have lots of stories of people telling me things like that.
Yeah. The fact that you stop and listen to them too is probably a big part of building trust, which I've also heard you talk about the importance of building trust with these individuals, because they've probably had a lot of bad instances where developing trust with other people is hard for them. That's also, I think, a big part of what you do. Do you think that has made you a better veterinarian by having to learn how to do that?
It definitely has. One of the things that we do, so we do these street clinics, and, they could be small. I've done street clinics. We've taken care of 5 or 6 folks. We've done one in Chicago where there's 500 folks there. But being able to listen to their story, working within the time you have, one of the things I learned about was how important positioning was. I think I even see it as general practice. By positioning, I mean, when we're going to build trust, we need to be eyeball to eyeball with that person. So if they're down, many times they are sitting on the ground because we're out in a park or in the grass. If they're on the ground, then we're on the ground. We're talking to them. If they're squatting down, we're kind of squatting down too. They might be sitting on some steps. So we really work on positioning to build trust. And that's a skill that I think applies everywhere, right? The last thing we want to do would be standing, in the extreme, we're standing wearing a white coat with our arms crossed, looking down at them. But sometimes you'll get that in a veterinary hospital, especially the white coat effect, standing across from folks. People living on the street have been traumatized. They often definitely have a dislike and a fear of authority, and there's a built-in distrust, especially if someone that's wearing something that looks, like a uniform. And it could be anyone from an ICE official to, a doctor with a white coat. So building that trust is challenging, but really important.
Also, like you said, the taking care of the pet is one aspect, and that could probably build trust too, because again, that they probably care more about that pet than anything else. And I think you even said a lot of them care more about taking care of their pet than themselves. And that rabies vaccine is huge because it is public health, but then also you've been able to interact with other people who are dedicated to this population, whether it's, human health that is trying to offer support for them. You mentioned dentistry and things like that. And I think you said that's kind of how you also found how to help them, was to collaborate with other people. So what have you learned about collaboration, and how has that kind of changed your approach and different things?
Maggie, thanks for bringing that up, because one thing I'm kind of passionate about is we were doing these clinics, and we actually, because veterinarians are interested in doing that kind of work, it's a welcome relief from the intensity of practice because no money ever changes hands. We've never taken a dollar at Street Dog Coalition. We have teams in over 50 cities right now doing these clinics, usually on a monthly basis, and everything's free. But I started looking at a model, kind of an innovative model of collaborative health. You could call it One Health, but we called it One Health Outreach. And we collaborated with some medical folks. We had this hypothesis, which has proved to be true, that people, if they go to a clinic where they're getting their pets taken care of, they're going to be less resistant to a medical care than they would be if the medical clinic was offered by itself. In other words, people are, and maybe us too, we're reluctant to get poked and prodded. We've had bad experiences with doctors, and we don't want the bad news. Now we're at a pet clinic, we'll do anything for our pets, so we'll go out and stand in line for a long time. And if someone says, hey, can we check your blood pressure? You're here anyway, why not? You can take your pet with you. And we used a tent system where we had different tents. And so the core of what we called One Health Outreach was three-legged stools, veterinary care, medical care, and dental care. And probably right in the middle of that was social work and counseling, kind of connecting all things. So we started offering all those modalities in concert with taking professional students in the field. And so this became a weekend adventure where we go to underserved communities. And along with moving from one end of Leash to the other, I moved up from, things are rolling pretty well with Street Dog Coalition. So I've kind of moved beyond that. And I'm working more with the tens of millions of Americans that can't afford care. So that's the working class, the working poor, the single mothers, the struggling veterans. They might be housed, but so many studies show that tens of millions of Americans can't afford veterinary care for their pet because they're just trying to pay the rent. So I moved into that group, and we'd go to underserved communities. Everything was still free. We'd offer this menu of services. We would do it on a Saturday and a Sunday. We used tents, kind of like a circus, because we put up our tents. They were pretty big to keep things private and separate. And then we take it down. We go to a next community on Sunday. And we had, vet students with us, and medical students, dental students, social work students, and of course, clinicians supervising them and doing the work. So anyway, that model's been really interesting. And I think it's becoming the model for community health right now. And so, now we're talking about public health, but when you think of community health, veterinary medicine, doing veterinary care is a gateway to other care for folks who are otherwise reticent to receive it.
Yeah. So this is becoming a hot topic on access to care. I'll be honest, I don't know the numbers. I don't know if it's gotten worse. I would totally believe it if it has, because of the economic situation of, it's just getting more and more challenging to afford veterinary care. Veterinary care is getting more expensive. There's a lot going on. And when I actually got to meet you in person, this was at the Veterinary Leadership Conference at the beginning of the year, and you spoke on this topic. And I was so impressed because there were a lot of veterinary students that were there. And afterwards, and I don't know if you were there to hear, but after a lot of people had left the room, the vet students had gathered at one of the tables, and they started talking about challenges of their curriculum and addressing these things. And they were talking among themselves, exchanging contact to share what their school was doing. And so they're really passionate about access to care in this topic. So what are you witnessing around this? What are your thoughts? Acknowledging that there are many thoughts, but I want to highlight your perspective because you've done a lot in this area.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I think veterinarian's been around a while. I realize that we are working with a different group of veterinary students. It's kind of like a little bit of a return to the late 60s, early 70s Vietnam era, where people were thinking way outside, their job and looking at bigger issues. But access to care, it's a big topic. For me, it's a little bit more specific because access to care is actually tied to the lack of diversity within our profession. So if we're talking about problems in the profession, we are the number one healthcare profession in terms of lack of diversity. Absolutely 92% white in veterinary professions. So these are numbers I look up and follow. We're also one of the top 5 least diverse occupations, period, of any occupation in the United States. And it's getting worse. So at that conference, my talk initially was entitled, "Our Clients Are Getting Richer and Whiter." And they actually said, that's too controversial. So I toned it down to pets and poverty. But that is a true statement that can back up as this affordability gap goes on. And I don't get too much into the details, but obviously the cost of veterinary care is going up faster than inflation, but mainly household income. So over time, fewer and fewer people can afford veterinary care. And the people that cannot afford veterinary care are largely composed of racial minorities, because that's what structural racism is. It's already built into the system. Is the people without money tend to be from minorities, especially Blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans. And that's probably not ever going to change. So we are really doing a disservice to that large group of pet owners. And at the same time, because we're not even interacting with them, because they can't even afford to come in, and they don't even know what veterinary care really is. They're not interested in entering the profession. I know we've tried hard. We've made inroads, but the numbers aren't lying. There hasn't really been much change in the number of Black and Hispanic and Native American veterinarians. So that's all, to me, tied with that access to care. And if you don't mind, I wanted to pitch 2 ideas that I've been trying to get out there for a conversation. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Okay. The first one is called, I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm not going to go details, but these have all been kind of worked through. The second one is more doable than the first, because the first one is called Medicaid 2030, key being 2030, where the folks on Medicaid, 80 million of them, the ones that are on Medicaid that have pets, so they're already enrolled in Medicaid, can now enroll up to 2 pets and get a $400 subsidy every year for each pet for veterinary care at a network of participating clinics. Of course, the first question people ask is, what's it going to cost? And who's going to pay for it? So that's going to involve some spending, and that's probably not going to happen in the current political climate. But I think it's an idea, meaning we're going to provide that safety net. Insofar as pets are more considered part of the family, that's the conversation that's going on now. Then in a way, we want to treat them like members of a family, in the sense of providing that safety net, so families aren't going through the anguish of economic euthanasia. And we can provide that support. And obviously, it's going to be paid for by taxpayers one way or another, but it doesn't mean it's every taxpayer. It could be sales tax from people buying pet food. And the other idea is easier to do. It's called SNAP-P. And as you probably know, SNAP used to be food stamps. So low-income folks get an allowance for a food stipend that's on a debit card. And they go into a grocery store and they can buy as much food as their allowance allows. For a single person, that's around $200 a month. For a family of 4, it might be closer to $800 a month. There's certain foods that are allowed, and there's some things that are not allowed, like cleaning products, alcohol, some other things. And one of the things that's not allowed is pet food. And if we can get pet food put into the column of what's permitted, it's not going to cost anything. It won't cost the government anything. And allow people, say, someone living with their cat or dog by themselves gets $200. They want to spend $20 on pet food. It's up to them. They can spend that money however they want. And because right now people are using SNAP to buy people food and feeding it to their pets, as a nutritionist, you probably know that homemade diets can be good and they can be not so good. And so that's kind of what's happening now. It's kind of crazy. So this actually solves that problem, because grocery stores, usually carry pet food that's a name brand. It's not prescription diet. So that's the idea I've kind of been working on. But one thing I'm not good at is trying to figure out policy change and working with legislations and politicians. So I'm looking for some help with both of those initiatives. They're just ideas right now. We've tried to pilot some things in Colorado to get things rolling, but just want to put those ideas out there because I think they might eventually bubble up to the surface.
You have to have people who know how to go through those hoops. But I mean, you've shown that with some gumption, bias for action, and getting the right people together, you can make things happen. So I think you've got to get your ideas out there and start, building those networks. And I think we can do a lot in our profession. So this is what is taking up a lot of your time these days, or what else are you focused on now?
Well, I told you I'm pretty scattered.
Yet?
I work on the QPR thing. And one part of my story I didn't really talk about, but I'm getting ready to go back to Ukraine in June. I've been there twice before. And really that it turns out that's been the highlight of my veterinary career looking back, just in terms of the impact it's had on me personally. And so to tell the story, 2 weeks after the war broke out, when the war broke out, I actually started saying, no, I want to do something. And I felt like everybody probably said that to themselves too. And as a veterinarian, that was what I could do, best way I could help. And I knew there was a refugee start to leave Ukraine very quickly. Within the first day, there was 50,000 and eventually 6 million crossing mostly into Western Europe. And so I looked at the map and I just Googled around and I found a couple of veterinarians in Romania that worked right on the border with Ukraine. And he just randomly sent them an email because they both spoke English and said, hey guys, I'm Dr. Geller from the US. I know what's going on. I want to come out over and help. Do you think we can put an effort together if I come over there? And they said, sure, come on over. We had no plan whatsoever. So 2 weeks after I fly over to Bucharest, Romania, one of the vets out named Alex is nice enough to pick me up. We go to the border. We're on the Danube River. It's a ferry boat, a border crossing, and people are coming across like crazy, mostly women and children. And we figure out we can set up a vet tent right on the border on the Romania side, literally right there past the gates. And we can provide care to every pet that's living in the country because they need to actually have a European Union passport, which requires, of course, full vaccinations, parasite treatment, and sick animal treatment before they can travel. So we set up there under their supervision. When I say we, I mean the Street Dog Coalition at that time. And then I had so many people that wanted to help out. So we had rotating teams coming in for about 3 months. We stayed in a youth hostel and took care of all these pets as they crossed. Lots of stories there too. And then after 3 months, the Ukrainians realized this is going to be a long-term deal with this war. So they all started coming back. So many millions of them came back and everything shifted. And then I went into kind of phase 2 of my efforts there where I got a very large donation from someone in New York City, was able to purchase a mobile hospital, have it built in Phoenix, Arizona, had it shipped over, which was quite the adventure, to UK. And then I driven from UK to Ukraine. And at that time, I had partnered up with a group called Worldwide Vets, led by Gemma Campling, who's an amazing, very, very brave veterinarian. So that clinic we were doing lots of work in different parts of the country, including lots of sterilization, so many stray animals getting hit by cars. But we also did, lots of sick animal work. We took care of wounded animals, burned animals. And we just have rolling teams of volunteers coming in, international volunteers, not just from the US. So I have an opportunity to go back there in June. I'm going to bring over a bunch of supplies, and I'm actually getting to speak at a Ukrainian veterinary conference. So that should be interesting, especially since I don't really speak any Ukrainian, and many of them don't speak English. So anyway, that's been a big adventure for me.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll have a translator for you. Um, Thank you for bringing. I completely forgot about that. I had it in my notes. Not only your work in Ukraine, you've done some projects in Gaza as well, with Worldwide Vets. But you mentioned that was probably one of the highlights, or if not the highlight of your veterinary career. And I mean, I guess I can assume a lot, but I don't like to assume. So, if you put it in words, like what was it about that experience that you say has been the highlight?
Well, it's really about the world really opened up to me. And so not only was I able to get out of the veterinary hospital and do street medicine, which I had been doing for about 10 years in the US, but went to a place like Ukraine where a lot of similar situations. I mean, this was really a land of crisis and chaos, and people, veterinarians had closed up their practices, shelters had shut down, dogs were just, running wild on the streets, so to speak. I mean, it's not as crazy as that sounds. Gaza is more like that. But I got to collaborate with Ukraine veterinarians, and on our mobile hospital I mentioned to you, we hired a Ukrainian veterinarian named Olha, who had pretty basic rudimentary skills when it came to things like sterilization. But she trained up so quickly. She was so smart that she's now our lead veterinarian. And, she taught us things like plank incisions in cats because things are different over there. But it was working with Ukrainian veterinarians that was really the highlight, but also the Ukrainian people, because we ended up doing street clinics with them too. And again, most of the men were fighting, so there weren't that many men around, but it was these women and these babushkas, these grandmas, clutching under their cats. They didn't want to give them up. They'd wait outside our trailer for 5 or 6 hours while we did sterilization surgery. Or, we said he'd come back later. There was so much gratitude there too. So I really appreciated it. The folks, they would take us out for dinner. We get to eat borscht and other Ukrainian foods, but they were so generous, giving us places to stay and all that. So the whole experience, there's kind of this cloud of danger too. When I first saw Gemma, the first video I saw of her was doing surgery, wearing full protective gear, meaning, flak jacket, helmet, working headlamp. You could hear some bomb blast going off outside this building. She went down through a trap door and into a basement bunker, continued doing her surgeries. I said, okay, I want to work with this lady. So that's Gemma, by the way. But so the international flavor, the kind of, the cloud of danger. I mean, definitely sirens are going off. I don't think it was overtly dangerous. I don't think it is now. I think it'd be bad luck to get hit, but you get hit by falling shrapnel is the usual way people get injured or killed. It's been a battle with my family. I have 2 grown daughters now. They have families. They don't really want me going over there, but they're supportive because they see how much the work means to me. And so I really appreciate their support.
Yeah. Well, I admire so much of what you've done. And again, it just really struck me watching these vet students get inspired after your talk and talk among each other. And, I think we do have an exciting generation who does want to have this bigger purpose and contribute to making the world a better place. And so if you were to think of the best piece of advice for people in veterinary medicine who are thinking about those things, what would you say to them?
Just try to create opportunities to get outside your typical workplace scenario. I mean, even just thinking about international veterinary medicine, there's so many opportunities. I've seen, profit work. And it can be hard to break free because we're under financial pressure too. So it's not like we can all just take off, but explore the opportunities, keep thinking about both ends of the leash, and maybe also that it's never too late to do something. So never think like, oh, well, I could have done that when I was younger. I'm not intentionally doing it. That's what's happening. I'm doing more and more new things and keep learning. And I hope others realize, hey, I can do the same.
Yeah. Well, I always love to end with a question around gratitude. So when I say, what is something you're most grateful for? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I'm grateful for the luck and the opportunities that I've had along the way. I'm grateful for getting to hear the messaging of doing everything with love, because I think if you can embed that in what you do, it really adds a huge impact to your life personally, to the people around you.
That was Dr. Jon Geller. And if this conversation has inspired you, I encourage you to take a next step. If you're interested in the policy work Jon discussed, Medicaid 2030, SNAP P, or access to care more broadly, he is actively looking for people to help move these ideas forward. So reach out to him directly. Links are in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper on the intersection of animals, people, and policy, the Human Animal Bond Research Institute, HABRI, does incredible work in this space as well, and is also a place to get started. You'll find that link in the show notes as well. For a full summary of the key takeaways from today's episode and ways to apply them to your own life and career, I have been creating a new Substack that has podcast club guides to do just that for you. And please subscribe to the podcast and share it with somebody who needs it. Until next time, keep reimagining what's possible in your veterinary life.